Hello and happy Thursday. Welcome to another Lunch and Learn with Purse Strings. For those of you who are new to the Purse Strings community, we're all about providing tools, resources, all about finance to our communities of women. But then when you're ready to, let's say, get divorced, buy a house, get a will, make a trust, plan for retirement, pay off debt, we have top tier financial professionals willing, ready, and able to serve you. We call those our purse strings approved professionals, and Lucinda is one of them. And we're excited to have her on today. As in February, we're talking all things divorce. So today we're going to be talking about how to untangle your finances from your ex-spouse and all things kind of in this divorce process. So if you're watching live, throw in any questions you may have. We're happy to help try and answer those. If you're watching the replay, you can still put those in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But before we get started, Lucinda, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you and kind of the work that you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity. I started in financial services 10 years ago as an administrative assistant or an advisor assistant, and quickly learned that I loved helping people and knowing more about finances. So I went about getting licensed and pretty early on realized that my audience, I was attracting mostly single women, either through divorce, widow, or younger women choosing to stay single. And I wanted to find a better way to serve that market. So I went about getting my certification to be a certified divorce financial analyst. It's a mouthful. So CDFA is a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But basically, with the CDFA, it allows me to help women before, during, and then after manage their money after the divorce as well. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you on today. And yeah, the CDFA designation is very interesting. If you are going through divorce, I recommend getting someone who has a CDFA designation since they know all the nitty gritty details about that divorce, separating those finances, which is really kind of what we're going to. So, just to dive in, what are kind of the first steps in this financial divorce process?
Yeah, so depending on, sometimes people find me, early on. I'm one of the first people they talk to. And in that case, I really help get them organized financially. So we start gathering statements for all of their accounts, checking, savings, brokerage accounts. We look at any retirement accounts. We want mortgage statements, and we go through just any asset or liability for that case too. Credit cards definitely included. Anything that could have any potential to be divided between the two. And we start talking about assets and what if something was inherited, when was it inherited, and so there's a lot of conversations depending on what their asset umbrella covers. So if they get to me early on, I help get them organized. They'll need those documents, not only for me, but for lawyers, depending on what route they choose to go to, if they litigate, mediate, or arbitrate. And then we start looking at if they've had conversations, if it's what we refer to as a friendly divorce, and they've talked about sort of what they want to do, then I can show them different analysis as far as any tax ramifications or what's it look for like in 5 years or 10 years? How is this going to affect the retirement on both sides? And typically I work with one of the two spouses. Occasionally we'll work with both spouses depending on the arrangement for the divorce, but typically it's one or the other.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I know getting all that paperwork is really essential, especially if you haven't really been one of the financial decision makers in the household. I know that's an essential part. And then, yeah, kind of working on how to divide those finances. And I like that you bring out the point of what's it going to look like, 5 years down the line and different things like that, because learning about finances, I think one of the most interesting thing is a dollar is not always worth a dollar, depending on what account it's in, depending on where you pull it from, the taxes. So it might seem even as in numbers, but by the time you get that dollar into your pocket, it's actually worth a different amount.
Yeah, we see that a lot too. I think a lot of times sometimes people just get worn down Like
Yeah.
they're in the divorce, that it's emotionally draining, it's mentally, it's physically. There's so many things. Do you have young children, older children? How long have you been together? And so I think sometimes people just are like, I just want to settle and move on and be done with it. But I always want to say, but like you need to look at 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. Where are you going to be at with your savings? How are you going to be situated for retirement? So we can have some honest conversations about that and not just take like, that golden ticket that, oh, there's the $500,000 in cash I'm going to give you. Well, that's great for now, but what does that do for you 10 years from now? So it's
Right, right.
absolutely.
And so, working on separating our financial lives from somebody else, are there, from someone who's been in multiple divorce proceedings, is there some like major things that we should be aware of, either when dividing finances or something people typically forget about? Any of those highlights?
I think a lot of times there are some things that are forgotten about. Typically, the first thing is to reset your trust. If you have a family trust, to reset your trust. I think that most of the time people are very good about saying, okay, this is your credit card, this is your savings account. So people are really good about dividing things that way. Occasionally you'll come across a hidden, or not hidden, but a forgotten IRA or 401k account that was at a previous employer. And most of the time, the dollars in those are not that significant. But those type of accounts are usually forgotten. So I give them a questionnaire and ask about history, work history. And a lot of times, if I don't see statements from different employers' accounts, I'll say, what about your retirement from this job? What about, do you have an IRA from here? You moved from Chicago to Los Angeles, I ask a lot of questions, and it can be overwhelming. And I always tell people, take your time. I'm
Mhm.
on your time to get through this, and I'm happy to help. But it's a lot. Like we're digging not only into your present situation, but your past situation too, and maybe even further. Like before you got married, what did you have before you got married? So there's so many questions that are involved on the financial analysis. The other things that I want to mention, life insurance. A lot of times that gets overlooked, and it's super important for people to know that the spouse should have the policy in their name. So let's say the wife um, has, sorry, the husband has a life insurance policy in his name, and it's for his beneficiaries, and she's the beneficiary. So part of the divorce is that he will still keep the life insurance policy, and she will continue to be the beneficiary. But what happens if he stops paying on that policy?
Mhm.
then then she has no coverage, and something happens to him, then she has no coverage. And she, 10 years, 20 years in retirement, all of a sudden was kind of thinking that that might be money for her or maybe for their kids, and
Mhm.
it's not there. So we've got to make sure that things are titled correctly, and a lot of times that is something that's overlooked, as well as health insurance too. What will happen with health insurance? We've all been on the husband's program, and now I have to get Cobra, or I have to get my own, and it's very costly. And so that cost needs to be included as far as the dividing of the assets and spousal support.
That's a great point, especially that life or the health insurance, because that is a big coverage that usually you're all on one person of the families. Um, and so for the life insurance, what's the way it should be titled to kind of cover a to protect yourself if the ex stops paying on that?
So the owner should be the wife. So
Got
she will
it.
own the life policy on him, and whether he makes payments to her and then she pays it, however they want, or if that's just part of the settlement, however they arrange that, she should be the owner of the policy on him.
Got it. Got it. Okay, cool. And so I know you mentioned, there's litigation, mediation, and arbitration, right? Arbitration,
Arbitration, yes.
arbitration.
Yep.
And you would be one of the professionals you could have on a divorce team as a CDFA. Who else might be on your team while getting divorced?
Yeah. So I think essentially, everyone should have a therapist. Whether it's individual, couple, family, everyone that is touched by that divorce should have a therapist. I think there should be a CPA involved. There should be a lawyer. Whether you're doing mediation, litigation, or arbitration, you should have a lawyer as a consultant or a lawyer that's doing the mediation.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, but in my mind, those are the most important people. I
Mhm.
can help on the financial side, but for tax questions, you need to go to a tax expert. So, and there are a lot of things that I can help with, but I cannot answer, regarding taxes, and legally, I can't answer
Right.
questions legally. I can offer my opinion, or I can say, well, I know this couple that went through it and they did this, but for true legal advice, you need a lawyer. So definitely lawyer, CPA, and therapist. I think those are super important.
Awesome, awesome. Another one that we always like to also mention is a certified divorce lending professional. If you have to buy your house or like refinance your house or buy a new house, we find that those are sometimes helpful as well.
Yes.
But it does take a whole team to get divorced. You do need all these different expertise. And so we always say, email them all together, bring them together, introduce them to each other. That's not weird. You can bring them together and make sure just they're all aligned. Because they're not against each other or fighting for your business. They're all there as one, which I think sometimes we forget, but I always like to bring that point back up.
Absolutely. And I do think probably in every divorce situation I've been in, there has been a house involved. And I do always get someone, mortgage broker, realtor, always get them involved in the conversation. So,
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of little nuances that you don't always know about.
yes.
Um, and so, what's the role specifically of the CDFA in this process?
So it depends on, again, it depends if you're doing mediation, litigation, or arbitration. But basically, we organize the finances, we do a financial analysis, help divide the assets. We can give a starting point. Like if you want to do 50-50 and you have two homes, here's the basis of all these homes, and all of your financial assets together. Give an idea of child support and spousal support as well. So it's really an analysis of what their monthly expenses are, what they would need on a monthly basis to move forward. We can do it for both sides of the divorce, not necessarily just the one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can dig deep and we can analyze and do the expense analysis for them. So if they want to hand me all of their utility bills and all of their credit cards, we can do that. We can sit down and go, okay, on a monthly basis, this is what you're spending for clothing and food,
Mm-hmm.
and do all of that as well. So that's a little more in depth, but those are, we can prepare the documents to give to the lawyers to take to the court. And we can appear in court as a professional witness as well. If,
Wow.
if it goes to that extent. And it's important for you can't do that if you do not have your CDFA. So,
Okay. And I'm sure the next question you always get is then how are you compensated for the service? Is it a lump sum? Is it an investment fee? How is that? Because it seems like all that work plus that budgeting that you kind of mentioned at the end there, it's such great added value.
well, and that's a great question. So I think for the most part, most CDFAs bill either as with a retainer saying, we think it's going to be so many hours. This is what we will provide for you. And we'll take a retainer fee, and then similar to how lawyers handle their practice. Others I know bill by project
Mhm.
and bill by hour. So every divorce is different, every couple is different. And so someone may just need a couple of hours of my time. And so I will just consult with them for a couple of hours and bill that way. Most of the time it's by project. So they may want the full financial analysis, and then we'll bill by project that way. And I spell out, how many hours they'll have with me in conversation, in meetings. And if we get to a point where it's over that, then we can discuss anything further. But for the most part, we know basically by looking at someone's assets early on, we know about how long it will take to get through the divorce. But it's different. Every divorce is different.
Right, right. Yeah, it's always interesting to see kind of how that fee structure is structured. And I know a lot of people start with their attorney, but we always say, a CDFA has their expertise in the financials, so they'd be a great one for the financials, where an attorney is great with the law. And so they'll know the legal things, but you do want kind of a specialist in that financial arena to help you out.
Yeah, and I've had people that are thinking about divorce and they're not sure if they can truly afford to be divorced. And so we'll do, we'll kind of look into the future and say, okay, based on this general information that you're telling me, you can expect this or that. And a friend of mine once told me that they referred to it as a crystal ball. And it is that you're kind of looking into the future. You don't have all of the information, but you have some of the basic information. And so sometimes people just want to know if we do get divorced, what's that going to look like for me? So
that's a huge question that people have all the time. And so, what do people do if they can't afford to get divorced?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think, some people will just then start to set out a plan. We'll sit down, we'll talk about savings, and we'll talk about, um, you know, can they cohabitate for a while and be amicable with each other, and then get to a point where they both have enough savings where they can, move on their own, live on their own for a while. And possibly it's considering a job change. So again, everyone's different. The couples are different, but when people don't feel like they can support themselves or someone else in a divorce, that's probably, I think, one of the more difficult situations, because they don't want to be together anymore. And
Right.
it's about setting out a plan to make that happen.
Definitely. Yeah, it can be very difficult, but kind of just starting with the numbers, starting with the analysis, seeing where you're at seems like it's the, kind of the essential first step to kind of look and see what route you want to take forward.
Yeah.
I know we've covered on a lot of great information so far. Let me see if there's any questions. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you wanted to make sure is shared today?
Let's see. I had a few notes here. I think you covered most of it. I think I always tell people from the get-go, it's overwhelming, and the amount of information that they have to provide, it's just a lot. And we're looking into their personal lives, and they have to know that all of that information is confidential. It's not shared with anyone. It's between myself and my client. They give me written permission to even speak to their lawyer or to their CPA. And so I just, try to go about it with as much grace for them as possible, and knowing that their situation is different than anyone else that I've worked with. And they just, they need to take a deep breath and just take it one step at a time, and we'll help them through it. And knowing that they have a good team of professionals around them is probably one of the most confident building things that they can do.
And I think that's a big highlight of, why you really want to make sure you're working with someone who you can really trust and you feel comfortable with, because you do have to expose a lot. And granted, that is confidential between you two, but you want to make sure that's someone that you feel comfortable sharing that information with as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple questions came in. The first one is, should you contact a CDFA before a lawyer?
I think yes and no. I think depending on your situation, I think it's helpful if you have an idea before you speak to a lawyer. It's helpful to know where you sit financially. And so I would say yes, but then at the same time, the lawyer will ask you some general questions, and then will refer you to someone like myself, or, have you talked to someone else? Maybe you have a financial advisor you can run some questions by. And so it will happen one way or the other, depending on the situation. But I definitely think getting your finances in order first is extremely helpful, and possibly could save you some money down the road too.
Right, definitely. And then what states can you work in?
I can work in California.
Got it.
So I can work in other states. It's just I know California laws, and I know divorce laws in California. I can manage I have other clients in other states that I manage money for. But I feel most comfortable in California from the divorce standpoint. If someone's from a different state, then there's a team of CDFAs across the United States that I can refer them to.
Awesome. Yeah, I know it's always interesting what states people can serve. And we do have
Yeah.
CDFAs in other states, but it's good to know that California is kind of your specialty. And then Tracy asked, are there any common items that are most people overlook? I know we mentioned the life insurance.
Life insurance, healthcare, the trust and will, I think, is a big one. And if you don't have a trust in your marriage, then you should set one up when you divorce. So definitely the trust and the will. And I think the tax conversation is definitely important.
Yeah.
What's it going to look like in 10 years or 15 years when I start to withdraw for retirement? Those are all great conversations, not necessarily missed, but maybe not thought all the way through on it. Yeah.
It's a lot to think about right away of separating, getting a new house with the kids, but then 15 years ago, 15 years ahead. I mean, that's a lot to handle. So I think your other great starting piece of advice was also having a therapist because it can get overwhelming.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate all the great information you shared. I think this has been full of, good nuggets for people who are getting started or in the process. And, if anyone has any additional questions, please reach out. Lucinda is a Purse Strings approved professional, so you can reach out to her on our site, pursestrings.co. Her email's been going through the bottom of the screen. And, just have a conversation, just get started, start looking at those numbers is kind of where we always recommend to start figuring out, your new future.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maggie. I really appreciate it. Great questions. And I'm happy to answer questions. So if anyone wants to email me, then please feel free to.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on today. We'll be back again next week with another little lunch and learn. And until then, be financially fearless.
Great. Thank you, Maggie.
Of course.